Montana Territory, November 1887. The wind cut like a blade across the plains, and by the time Adaline North reached the edge of the Three Pines cattle range, her baby was barely stirring in her arms. She stumbled through the snowdrifts, boots soaked through and skirts stiff with frost. The boy Gideon, her only son, was wrapped in what little she had left, her late husband's coat, too big and too thin for the cold creeping in. His breathing was shallow now, lips pale, eyes closed. She pressed him tighter to her chest, heart hammering with a fear that had not eased for 3 days. Her wagon wheel had splintered on a rock outside Miles City, and the last of her coin had gone to a traveling doctor who only shook his head and muttered, "Pneumonia's got hold of him." She had begged for help. No one answered. There was no one left to answer. Except now, rising ahead through the flurries, was a small bunkhouse and a barn, fences stretching long across the snow-covered land. A cattle ranch. Smoke from the chimney lifted weak into the sky. She trudged forward, half dragging her legs, until her knees gave out. She hit the ground hard, and the baby whimpered, just once. She forced herself back up. "Help!" she cried, voice hoarse. "Please!" The door swung open. A tall man stepped out. He wore a worn buckskin coat, dark hair shaggy under a Stetson, and a rifle slung over his shoulder. His face was weathered and serious, but his eyes locked on her and the child in her arms. He moved fast. By the time he reached her, she was down again, coughing into the snow, her arms still curled around Gideon. "Ma'am," he said, crouching low. "You're freezing. We need to get the boy warm." She tried to speak, but her teeth were chattering too hard. He scooped the child from her arms with a gentleness that surprised her, then pulled off his coat and wrapped it around the boy before shrugging out of the thick wool blankets from his own back. He laid them over her shoulders. "I am not leaving you," he said. "Hold on." She blinked up at him. "Your name?" he asked. "Adaline," she whispered. "Adaline North." "I am Kellan Tate," he said. "You are safe now." He carried Gideon inside while she staggered after, warmth hitting her like a wave once the door shut behind her. The bunkhouse was small, just a stove, a cot, a table, and one chair. Kellan placed the baby on the cot, then stoked the fire higher. "Blankets," he muttered, pulling more from a chest in the corner. He wrapped Gideon again, this time with layers, and pressed his hand gently to the child's chest. "He is breathing." Adaline sank to her knees beside the cot. He needs help." "Please." "I know. Let's get him through the night first," Kellan said. "I will ride into town at sunrise, bring back the doc." "I already saw one," she said. "He said it was too late." Kellan looked at her then, steady and sure. "That man was wrong." For a moment, all the fear and fight drained out of her. She gripped the edge of the cot and let her forehead rest beside her son's. Kellan moved around the room, quiet, lighting a lantern, boiling water. He handed her a tin cup. "Drink," he said. "You are half frozen." She sipped carefully. Her hands shook. She looked up. "Why are you alone out here?" he asked. "My husband died last spring," she said. "We had a claim near the Tongue River, but the crops failed. I thought we could start over near the mountains." "You were traveling alone?" "No one else would come," she said. "I had to go somewhere." He was getting sick. Kellan's jaw tightened. He nodded, just once, and stood. "You are staying here tonight." No arguing. "I do not want to trouble, you are not," he said firmly. "You and your son are staying. That is final." She looked down at Gideon, who stirred faintly under the blankets. She reached for his hand. "I thought I was going to lose him," she whispered. "You are not," Kellan said. He moved to the stove and sat down beside it, arms resting on his knees. She watched him a long moment. There was something steady in the way he sat, something that made her feel safer than she had in weeks. She did not mean to fall asleep. But the warmth, the quiet, and the weight of exhaustion pulled her under. She woke hours later to a soft sound, her son, coughing. She scrambled up, heart in her throat. But Kellan was already there, kneeling beside the cot, holding a damp cloth to Gideon's brow. "He's warm," he said softly. "That is a good sign." Adaline pressed her hand to her mouth, her eyes filling. Kellan looked up at her. "He is not out of the woods, but he is fighting." She nodded, tears tracking down her cheeks. "Thank you." He stood slowly. "I will ride out at first light. There is a doctor in Livingston who knows what he is doing. You would do that for us?" He met her eyes. "Yes." She looked at him, then not just the coat he had given up, or the blankets he had wrapped around them, or the fire he had kept going, but the way he had taken her boy into his arms like he mattered, like he was his own. Something shifted in her chest. "Why?" she asked softly. Kellan hesitated, then said, "Because no one helped my mother when I was sick. My father was gone. She buried me under blankets and prayed over me, and no one came until it was too late." Adaline's breath caught. "I do not want that to happen to anyone else," he said. The room was quiet for a long time. Just the crackle of the fire, and the soft wheezing of her son. "You are kind," she said. "I am trying to be." She stepped closer. "You saved us." He looked down, then back up at her. "You are not saved yet. But I will not let you fall." And for the first time in weeks, Adaline believed that. She reached for his hand. He let her take it. They sat beside the stove, side by side, watching over the sleeping boy together. Neither said another word. But something had begun, something fragile, and quiet, and real. The snow had stopped some time before dawn. Pale blue light filtered through the single window, casting long shadows across the plank floor. Kellan had already saddled his mare and was tightening the cinch when Adaline stepped out onto the porch, Gideon bundled in her arms. The boy's breathing was still shallow, but his skin had begun to flush with the slow return of warmth. "You sure of this ride?" she asked, voice low. "Horse is rested. I know the way even in half light," Kellan said, glancing toward the horizon. "Doctor keeps the stove burning through the night this time of year. He'll be awake." She nodded, shifting her weight to ease the ache in her back. "If you're not back by sundown, you'll know I had to wait for him to finish with someone else," he said. "But I'll be back." She looked at the sky, then at the child in her arms. "He stirred twice in the night," she said. "Coughed hard. Started to cry but couldn't get it out." "That's good," Kellan said, stepping down from the porch. "Means he's still fighting." She adjusted the shawl around her shoulders, worn through at the corners. "You need anything for the ride?" He shook his head. "Took a biscuit and some jerky. I'll be fine." Her eyes lingered on him. "I don't know what kind of man does this. The kind who can't do anything else and still sleep," he said simply. "You'll stay inside today. Keep the fire steady." "I left more wood by the stove." "I saw." He swung up into the saddle, then paused. "You locked the door behind me." She tilted her chin. "I'm not helpless." "I never said you were." His mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but something close. Then he turned the horse and headed east, hooves muffled in the snow. Adaline stood there a long minute, watching until he disappeared over the rise. Inside, the warmth had settled deep into the walls. She laid Gideon back on the cot and touched his forehead. Damp with sweat now, but not dangerously hot. His small fingers twitched when she adjusted the blanket. She pressed a kiss to his temple, then tucked the quilt higher. The bunkhouse was cleaner than it had seemed last night. She found a basin by the stove, filled it with snow and set it to melt. Then she scrubbed the soot from her hands, smoothing her hair back with wet palms. Her reflection in the window startled her, eyes bruised with fatigue, cheekbones sharp from weeks of rationing. But her boy was alive. That mattered more than anything. The hours passed quietly. She spooned weak broth into Gideon's mouth when he stirred, then sat beside the cot mending the torn hem of her skirt with thread she found in a tin near the stove. She used the edge of the knife to trim the frayed cloth. Her hands were steadier than they'd been in days. Late afternoon brought wind again. The sky darkened, clouds thick with the threat of more snow. She pulled her son into her lap and held him close, listening for hooves. When they came, the relief was so sharp she had to grip the edge of the table to steady herself. Kellan pushed through the door with a man behind him, a gray-bearded doctor wrapped in a fur-lined coat, leather bag in hand. The doctor removed his gloves and bent straight to the child without a word. Kellan leaned against the wall, watching as Adaline hovered near. The doctor listened to Gideon's chest, tapped gently along his ribs, and checked the whites of his eyes. After what felt like forever, he looked up. "He's not through it yet," he said. "But his lungs sound clearer than I expected. Keep him warm. Broth every few hours. If you can get your hands on wild onion, boil it into tea, it helps." Adaline swallowed hard. "He'll live?" "With care," the doctor said. "He's strong, this one." She let out a breath that left her trembling. Kellan stepped forward, offering the man a coin purse. The doctor waved it off. "You ride through this wind for a stranger's child, that's payment enough." He left without fanfare, just a nod to Adaline and a glance toward the stove. Kellan shut the door behind him, shaking snow from his shoulders. "You didn't have to pay him," she said softly. "I didn't," Kellan replied. "He wouldn't take it." She looked down at her son, then back at him. "You rode hard in that wind. Horse'll be sore tomorrow, but she'll recover." "You always like this?" she asked. "Giving more than you get?" He shrugged out of his coat, folding it over a chair. "Not always. Just when it counts." She moved toward the stove, ladled broth into the tin cup, and stirred it with care. "You got people?" she asked. Kellan pulled off his gloves. "Not anymore." "Did you once?" "Brother. He died when we were boys." "Smallpox." She brought the cup to the cot and coaxed a few spoonfuls into Gideon's mouth. "That why you live out here?" "Part of it," he said. "Other parts quieter." Gideon let out a small murmur, then settled against the pillow. Adaline watched him breathe, then looked at Kellan. "You saved him." He met her eyes. "You got him here. That's what saved him." She studied him, his broad shoulders, the way his hands flexed when he was still, like he wasn't used to standing still at all. "Something about you," she murmured, "feels like a place I could rest." He didn't flinch from it. "Then rest." She sat beside the cot, her body finally easing. He pulled another chair close and sat across from her. Night pressed against the window panes, but inside the bunkhouse, the heat held. For the first time in more days than she could count, Adaline didn't feel alone. Kellan didn't try to fill the silence. He just stayed. By the third day, Gideon stayed awake longer, his eyelids fluttering open each time Adaline leaned in to feed him broth or wipe the sweat from his forehead. He still didn't speak, but his eyes followed her now, and once, when she laid her hand over his, he curled his fingers around hers. The fever hadn't broken completely, but it had eased. The worst had passed. Kellan hadn't left the bunkhouse since returning with the doctor. He brought in more firewood, repaired a loose hinge on the door, and patched a draft in the roof with oilcloth and nails. He moved through the space as if he'd lived in it for years, quiet and assured, but never assuming. He didn't ask questions unless he needed answers, didn't offer comfort unless she reached for it. That afternoon, Adaline was folding Gideon's blanket by the stove when she asked, "How long have you had this place?" 7 years, Kellan said, fitting a new latch onto the window frame. "Hired on as a hand when I was 20. Owner passed, left the land to his niece. She never came west. I stayed." She smoothed the edge of the blanket, eyes on the needlework stitched into the corner. "You ever think of going back east?" "There's no one left to go to," he said, not unkindly. "And I like the quiet. You don't seem like a man who minds company." "I don't," he said. Just haven't had much worth keeping. She folded the blanket again, slower this time. I didn't think anyone would stop for us. Not after Miles City. They didn't know what they were seeing, Kellan said. Most folks don't look close. Her mouth tugged at the corner, not quite a smile. You do? I try. She turned back to the cot, brushing a curl off Gideon's forehead. He was born too early. Always had trouble breathing come winter. That why you left the river? The cold came faster this year, she said, still watching her son. We had nothing left to burn. I thought if I could get him closer to the passes, maybe find work sewing or cooking. I don't know. There wasn't much of a plan. Still, he said, walking over to hang the hammer on its hook, you didn't stay still and wait for it to end. I couldn't. He nodded, then crossed to the table and poured water into a tin cup. You ever work cattle? She looked up. Cattle? I could use a second hand come spring. Not riding, not branding, but someone who knows how to keep records, manage stores, keep men honest. I can write. Keep accounts. I figured, he said. You've got the look of someone who's had to stretch flour through a long winter. She studied him a long moment. You offering me work? I'm offering you a place you don't have to leave. He didn't say more, didn't push. Just picked up a bowl and began peeling potatoes, his knife moving smooth and neat. Would Gideon stay with me? The ranch is quiet come spring. No hands but me. You'd have the bunkhouse to yourself. He'd have space. She reached for a stool and sat down across from him. You always think that far ahead? When it matters. The wind picked up again, brushing against the windows like a whisper. Inside, the stove crackled low and steady. My husband was a preacher, she said after a while. Not a fire and brimstone kind. He believed in quiet decency. Said the Lord showed up in the small things, a loaf of bread, a neighbor's hand, a warm roof. Kellan didn't look up. Sounds like a good man. He was. Her voice caught. He wouldn't have known what to do with this place, but he would have liked you. You talk about him like he's still close. He is. In bits. Kellan nodded. That's how it stays, I think. Not gone. Just quieter. They sat in silence for some time. The light shifted, casting long streaks of gold across the floor. Gideon stirred, then fell back into sleep, his breathing easier than it had been since they'd arrived. Adaline set the folded blanket aside. You ever think about starting something new? He looked at her then. I do now. She didn't answer right away. But she didn't look away either. I'm not asking for anything, he said. Just letting you know you don't have to run anymore. I don't think I can yet, she said. But I'm tired of running. Then don't, he said. Stay for the thaw. See what spring brings. She let out a breath, slow and quiet. I'll stay. He rose then, not quickly, and walked to the stove to stir the pot. She watched the way he moved, deliberate, unhurried, like he'd decided to give her all the time she needed. That night, after Gideon had fallen into a deep, calm sleep, Adaline stepped outside. The stars were sharp as pins, the sky a velvet black. Kellan was already out there, splitting kindling by lantern light. She walked over, wrapping her arms around herself. Cold night, she said. Most are this high up. But not empty, she said, glancing toward the bunkhouse window, where the firelight flickered soft and orange. No, he said. Not anymore. He handed her a piece of kindling. She took it. They didn't speak again, but they stood side by side until the lantern burned low, and the wind died down. By late December, the snow had settled deep and thick across the range, blanketing the land in a hush that stretched for miles in every direction. Days passed slow and steady, marked by the rhythm of small tasks. Kellan brought in water from the creek, chopped frozen hay for the mare and the mule, and checked the fences when skies stayed clear. Adaline kept the hearth warm, baked cornbread when the flour held out, and kept the boy close as he healed. One morning, While Gideon napped with color back in his cheeks, Adaline stepped out to hang linens along the side of the bunkhouse where the wind broke soft. Kellan was mending harness leather on the porch, his fingers moving with quiet purpose. She watched him a moment before she spoke. "You ever wonder what your life might have looked like if you'd left Montana?" He didn't glance up. "Not often." "Never?" "I figured it'd be more of the same. Work, silence, maybe a room above a tavern if I was lucky. But nothing that held." She draped a sheet over the rope, smoothing it flat. "Seems like you built something here." "I built enough to survive. I don't know that I ever built enough to stay for." Her hands paused on the cloth. "You staying now?" He looked over then, eyes steady. "I'm not going anywhere." Adaline nodded slowly, then turned the clothespin in her hand. "I used to sew for other families when we lived upriver. Took in hems and patched trousers for trade. My husband worried it wore me down, but I liked knowing my hands could bring something back from wear." "You make things last?" "I try." The wind stirred a corner of the sheet. Kellan rose and crossed the yard, picking up a fallen pin. He handed it to her, and their fingers brushed. She didn't move away. "I've been thinking," he said. "There's a cabin down by the Cottonwoods' old line shack. Roof's tight, chimney draws clean. I could fix the door. You'd have more space there." Her brow furrowed. "You trying to move us off?" "No," he said gently. "I'm trying to give you something of your own. Not just a corner in someone else's bunkhouse." She looked toward the cottonwoods, bare and silver with hoarfrost. "It's not that I don't want it. It's just no one's offered me anything without expecting something back in a long time. I'm not expecting anything but truth between us." She held his gaze. "And what if the truth is I don't know what this is between us yet?" "Then I'll wait," he said. "But I won't lie, I'd like to know what it could be." She let that settle between them, then turned toward the door. "Gideon will wake soon. You think on that roof. I'll think on the rest." Inside, the boy was sitting up, rubbing sleep from his eyes. She lifted him into her lap and fed him warm milk, her thoughts quiet but full. That night, after he'd fallen asleep against her shoulder, she stepped out again, shawl wrapped tight. Kellan was still on the porch, oil lamp beside him, a strip of leather in his hands. "You ever been in love?" she asked. His knife paused mid-cut. "Once. Long time ago. She married a man with more land. Do you think it's different when you've known loss? I think it makes you careful. Maybe slower to speak it. But not slower to feel it." Adaline crossed the yard, boots cracking thin ice. "I don't want to be careful anymore." Kellan stood, tall against the pale sky. "Then don't be." She reached for his hand, fingers cold from the night air. He took it, strong and sure, and didn't let go. "We'll try," she said. "We will." And there, beneath the stars and the quiet of the range, something new settled between them, not sudden, not loud, but certain. They stood in the dark, hands clasped, the wind soft through the cottonwoods. Behind them, the bunkhouse glowed warm, and inside, a child dreamed easy for the first time in weeks. The thaw came early that year. By late March, the snow receded from the cottonwoods in long, uneven lines, revealing patches of mud and flattened grass. The river behind the ridge swelled with meltwater, and birds returned to the rafters of the barn, calling sharp and high in the morning. Adaline stood near the open door of the lined shack, her sleeves rolled to the elbow, scrubbing the last of the soot from the hearthstone. She paused to stretch her back, one hand pressed to the base of her spine. Gideon sat on a quilt a few feet away, sorting through pine cones and pebbles he'd collected near the creek bed, his breath easy and even, his cheeks full again. Kellan appeared in the doorway with a plank of milled pine, the scent of sawdust still clinging to it. "Door's nearly hung. Just need to plane the bottom a touch more." Adaline wiped her hands on her apron. "Feels more like a home now. Not just a shelter." He set the board aside and leaned against the frame. "That was the idea. You've done more than I asked?" "You never asked for anything." he said. That's the part one keep thinking about. She glanced toward the small window, where a curtain fluttered faintly in the breeze. When I lost James, I thought I'd buried the last place I could belong. I didn't expect to find another. You didn't find it, Kellan said. You made it. She walked to the doorway, resting one hand on the frame beside his. You said once you wanted something worth keeping. I did. Do you think this is it? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of cloth. She opened it carefully. Inside lay a thin gold band, smooth with wear but polished clean. It was my mother's, he said. I kept it when she passed, figured I'd know when it was time. Adaline looked up at him, her breath catching. I don't want to build something near your life, he said. I want to build it with you. Cabin, boy, all of it. If you'll have me. She closed the cloth around the ring and held it against her chest. You're not the kind of man who says things he doesn't mean. I never have been. She stepped closer, her voice quiet. Then yes. I'll marry you. He exhaled slow, like something in him finally settled. I'll ride into town tomorrow. See if the preacher's back from Bozeman. We can wait till the river drops enough for travel. Kellan shook his head. I've waited long enough. They stood there in the open frame of the new door, the sun warm on their faces, and said nothing more. Gideon looked up from his quilt and called out, asking if he could show Kellan the stick he'd carved. Kellan knelt without hesitation, taking the boy's offering with the same care he gave everything that mattered. The next week, they stood beneath the cottonwoods, the preacher's voice low and certain in the morning light. Gideon clung to Adaline's skirt, solemn and wide-eyed, and when the final words were said and Kellan slipped the ring onto her finger, the boy grinned and clapped as if he'd known all along this was how it should end. After the preacher rode off, they lingered under the trees, the sun dappling their joined hands. I've never seen a spring come this fast, she said. Maybe it just waited for the right reason. They walked back toward the cabin, Gideon skipping ahead of them, calling out to the chickens he'd named in the yard. Kellan slipped his arm around her waist, easy and sure. That night, they sat before the fire, the boy asleep in the small loft Kellan had built from pine and cedar. Adaline leaned her head against his shoulder, and he turned slightly to rest his cheek against her hair. You ever think we were meant to find each other? She asked. No, he said. But I think we chose to stay. That's better. She smiled, her eyes closing. I like that answer. Outside, the wind moved gentle through the grass. Inside, the fire burned low and steady. And in the hush between day and night, they held on to each other with full hearts and open hands. They never left the ranch. That spring, Kellan added a second corral and 2 more milk cows to the herd. Adaline planted a garden near the creek, where the soil stayed soft. Gideon grew tall and strong, his laughter echoing across the pasture as he ran behind the dog Kellan brought home from town. Their life was not loud or grand, but it was honest and rooted. They built it with bare hands, quiet trust, and a kind of love that didn't fade when the seasons changed. And every morning, Adaline woke beside the man who had offered her a place to stay and gave her the whole of his heart instead.